Well, welcome to another edition of the Leadership Podcast, and today I am with the legend, the guru, that is Allan Kelsey, all the way from Dallas, Texas. Allan was a Durban boy, became a Joburg boy, became an Olympic swimmer in
92.
And you moved to?
Nebraska.
Nebraska, the center of America.
Yeah, literally the breadbasket of the U.S.
And you met your amazing wife, Steph.
I did. That was kind of, I think, the whole reason I went. That was kind of why God took me.
That is amazing. And you've worked with the Gallup organization, I know, even in its early stages.
Yep.
Some excitement there. And now you're working with one of the most amazing churches on the planet, I believe, Gateway Church.
Yeah, Gateway Church, Dallas, Texas. Pastor Robert Morris is the senior pastor. We are doing good things out in the middle of Texas out there, really enjoying what God has us able to do.
And you're playing the role of like strategic executive pastor. Did I say it right?
Yeah. So we have, let's see, I think eight regular campuses now, 2 prison campuses, and growing. And so there's just some work needed to be able to align all of the work that we're doing, making sure we're all pulling in the same direction at the same time for the same reasons.
Well, you're a machine, and we've benefited from that gift in our church as well. And I'm forever grateful for Gateway's generous spirit, Pastor Robert's vision to be that type of church.
Yeah.
And so we give a shout out to everyone back home, because
good.
you're a very special group of people to us. And we're grateful that you invest in us annually, actually, since we first met. And it's made a huge difference in how we think, perhaps how we do certain things, but also just in the culture of who we are.
Yeah.
And so we're grateful for it. We want to get some gold out of you today.
Well, let's get to it.
And that's going to be great. So one of the things you spoke about in our time together was a moment in time where a young man, or I'm not sure who he was, helped you kind of lift your gaze, lift your eyes, shift your vision. And that was like a catalyst almost to where your life went.
Yeah. What was interesting to me is that at that point in my life, serving the local church, I had a set of perspectives, a limited range of vision, and a set of priorities that made sense to me. And I wasn't uncomfortable with them. They were good. They served me. And then he showed up, and he began to talk about another option, like more distance that's in front of me. And it caused me to look, instead of right in front of me within the first 2 yards, but really just to lift my eyes and look further and further down the horizon.
That's amazing.
And he made it all seem possible. I mean, I think it was just some very dark magic, but he made it all possible to me. And in that moment, I was simultaneously happy and sad, because I was completely compelled by what sat in front of me. And I also immediately became aware that where I am is no longer okay.
Wow. So there's actually a tension, okay? When your eyes are lifted like that, when someone helps you see a bigger picture,
right,
there's this tension because you know you can't stay.
Yeah.
But going is going to come with a cost.
Absolutely. And it's a powerful leadership lesson. Bill Hybels talks about it quite a bit. He always talks about how, strategy and leadership is the process of going from here to there. And there's 3 components to that. I got to understand where here is, but I also have to understand why staying here is intolerable.
Sure.
I got to have a mechanism to get there, and then I got to be clear on where there is. And he said his leadership lesson was, I thought if I could just tell you how cool there is, that'd be enough to get us all moving. He said, and I beat that horse to death, and I just could not get the crowd to move. And God helped him see, no, we have to spend almost as much or even perhaps a little more time helping people understand why staying here is absolutely intolerable from this point forward.
That's amazing.
And he said as soon as he paid attention to that and then really went back and illustrated why where we are now is no longer okay, it produced all the energy that was needed in order to move forward.
So in some ways, it's almost like creating discomfort in the current circumstance.
It is a little bit, although if you are creating it, I feel like the people that you're addressing get a sense that feels synthetic.
Sure.
And it's conjured in some way. He realized, and I think it's a good leadership lesson for all of us, is that I think God's in the business of creating discontent.
Sure.
When he wants movement. And then the danger is, like, how do I diagnose this discontent that I have?
So let's stay there for a little bit, because as an organization, as Link Church, we're in a very exciting season, actually. At the moment, we are planning a launch in Umhlanga.
Right.
And that's coming up soon. Dates to be announced at Heart and Soul.
Yep.
And what that looks like, the venue, etc.
Wait. What's being announced? Where's it being announced?
Heart and Soul this Tuesday at Link Campus.
Nice.
And this coming Tuesday, it's going to be amazing. And I think the excitement around that is one thing. But it's also this whole idea of discontent that starts to breed in people.
Yeah.
They're sensing, all right, we're moving. Where are we going? Why are we going?
Right.
Do we need to go? Does there need to be another Link Church? What's the role we play? Is there a resource that's going to be asked of us to make this possible? And the answer to all that is possibly yes.
Right.
But I think I want to hang in the space of discontent because you speak about it as such a positive thing in the right context.
Right.
And I think currently in our church, there is a stirring of what this may mean for us.
Yeah.
And I think I'd like to know how you'd see this.
Yeah, so I'm convinced that God, when he said that he would provide all of our need according to his riches and glory, I'm fully convinced that that statement is absolutely empirically true. And so I believe that he provides vision then for what next looks like. So if you guys are dreaming about another expression somewhere in this, in this coastal area, then I believe that God's leading that. And if that's the case, then his supply or his provision for that isn't just what does tomorrow look like, but also can I give them the fuel to move toward that thing?
Great, yeah.
And in my opinion, fuel and discontent are the same thing. So it is my full expectation that the broader membership of your congregation are living in a sense of a growing sense of agitation or discontent in some way. And if it's not diagnosed correctly, everyday folks in attending the congregation could conceive that they feel some kind of discontent with Link. And they'd start picking on the music or the parking or the kids ministry or the coffee or the what these people wear or that guy's breath smells or whatever it is. Like it's because you have a discontent, you want to aim it at something, you don't know what you should aim it at. Well, as a visitor who's not here, stuck in the leaves of the trees of the forest that you live in, I want to offer the possibility that truly the discontent is designed by God as gasoline to say, no, you need fuel to move toward a better tomorrow.
That's amazing.
And you staying where you are is not okay. And so I'm going to start to stir. I'm going to start to create a little, I'm not so comfortable. Not so you run, but because there's a reason for it. Let's aim it at this thing that's coming and spend it there. That's what it's for.
Sure. And I would imagine that for any organization or any team or anything in life, you got to start to let that discontent fuel something in you to get to a point where you're ready to go almost.
Right. I see it as the grace of God because otherwise it's all on me.
Yeah, sure.
Like I got to cook it up somehow. And I just feel like, when I'm running on God's fuel, it's so much stronger than my own.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about something in this zone now. Now we're going to start breaking down. All right. So as we move, as we shift, you're a strategy guy. I think your insights into how we get from here to there are unbelievable. How you get teams to play in a direction that wins. One of the things you've actually literally said is like some teams play to win, others play to avoid losing.
Yeah.
And there's a huge difference.
Oh my gosh.
And quick story before we jump into this. When I was in America for the first time, maybe 6 years ago, I would meet a whole lot of people in California, and I would want to know from them what they think of South Africa. And the first one would say, wow, man, you're just so resilient. Like your nation just keeps taking a beating and you back up on your feet again. Like you're a resilient people. I thought that's awesome, Yeah. And the next guy I'd ask, and they'd be like, oh, man, you just keep coming back. You just keep standing up. I'm thinking that's the same thing. And the next one. I got to like 14 people in my list, and everyone had said the same thing.
Wow.
You're so resilient. And one night I was lying in bed, and I was thinking like, I don't know if I like that. I don't know if I want to be the boxer in the ring that's getting knocked out and standing up. I want to beat the other guy up,
Right.
And I actually felt like one of the differences between what I experienced in the nation of America and perhaps the perception of what we are here in South Africa, whether it's true or not, I'm not sure, is that resilience is not what we want. We don't want to be a team that's playing to avoid losing.
Yeah.
We want pioneering. We want to be a team that's on the front foot winning. Speak to us about that in the context of leadership.
Yeah, so, if you think about a rugby team and they're up by a lot. It's been a while since I watched the game, so I'm losing context with what reasonable, up by a lot numbers could look like on a scoreboard. But they're up by a lot. And if you think about the way that team plays, if they're playing to win, there's an element of risk involved, meaning they're going to let the ball go. Like they're going to pass it from one person to the next. And when it's being passed, there's a moment in time there where nobody owns the ball.
Sure.
It's just traveling somewhere. There's huge faith that's required for that because the enemy or the opposition could snatch that thing up because nobody's actually in possession of it in that moment. So it's high risk, right? But in that condition, when you're up and you're playing to win, there's a looseness, there's a freedom that's being played with. You're taking a little bit of risk. And you hear coaches saying, man, they were playing so loose, it was fantastic to watch. And it's not sloppy, but it's a little bit edgy. And they're taking some risks. And it's not gambling because there's a difference there. And I just love the way that they just have this quiet confidence about where we want to be, and they're heading toward it. And the scoreboard reflects it. But playing not to lose, I mean, you could be up by 2 points. And your decision is, man, there's 5 minutes left in this game. And for Pete's sake, we're not losing this game. So we're going to hold the ball, and we're gonna never pass it. And if I pass it, I'm literally going to hand it to the next guy so that my hands and his hands are on the ball at the same time. There's never going to be an opportunity for any risk in this thing whatsoever. And as a spectator watching those 2 games, in the end, both games end with the W on the board, like there's a win on the board, right? But the way the first game got there is fun and exciting, and you never know what's going to happen. And the way that the second game got there was boring and secure and took no risk. And the qualitative difference there is there was no faith required.
Sure.
And the kicker with that is that God said that without faith, it's actually impossible to please him. And so if we're going to play the game of life, like if we're going to deploy his tooling in our space, if we're going to operate the way that we're made, we're going to have to play to win.
Sure.
Not playing not to lose.
Oh, I love that.
So
I love it how it says it's impossible to please him without faith, because there's a sense of he is pleased with our faith. There's this he gets joy out of watching us give this thing a go.
Absolutely. And I think what that means then is fundamentally in our lives, as much as we always want to know the plays that we're going to run so we can see it coming, God is going to design it in such a way so that there is always an element of, I have no idea in our lives.
Sure.
And actually, he likes it like that.
Yeah.
It's how we get to please him, because we cannot then go into that space and go, yeah, I got this.
Yeah.
You have to say I have faith.
This is so good. And I think one of the things, I mean, you mentioned Newton's law, right? Which people always default to the lowest state or form.
We do.
This is the thing, right? So we default towards playing not to lose.
Yeah, so that law says that every body or every entity left to itself, meaning without some external provocation, will settle to its lowest state of form. That means there might have been a season, and if I think about, Link's history, and I'm making stuff up now because I wasn't there at the time. I just know from talking with you and some of your congregation members like what that story was like. I mean, who starts a church in a lychee orchard? You guys are crazy, right? I mean, I've lived in Westville. I know what the rain is like in this place. Like, that stuff's nuts. You're going to get rained out a few times.
We did.
Yeah, right. But there's an audacity around a group of people who are going to say, not only are we going to start church, we're going to start church in the most implausible place that you could possibly be. And when you do that in a place like that, you attract people who are comfortable with risk.
Sure.
That's going to be in the DNA of the fabric of your people, right? And as long as you keep running that play, they're going to feel like this is home because this is what I came for.
Yeah.
But then you move into this really fantastic building, a lamp on a hill that you can see for miles around, beautiful view. And the longer we stay in this place, the more we settle to our lowest state of faith form.
Sure.
And what brought them here, when I'm talking about the folks who found home at Link, is starting to not be present anymore, because we take wild risks. We're rested people doing risky things.
I love that, yeah.
Isn't here so much. And so they start going, I don't know if this is fitting me the way it used to anymore. And so I think there's always going to be some element of you guys going, yeah, and just when you thought you were getting comfortable, we're going to go back to what's in our DNA.
Sure.
We're going to go back to delivering, that thing that requires some audacious faith on our part.
I love that. And I mean, Mark Slevin mentioned that thought on the weekend, rested people doing risky things. I don't think he realized the prophetic nature with which he mentioned it and the power of those words. Right. But for sure, we get that back to front. We normally are unrested people doing very conservative things. We're restless, and so we're avoiding anything. But when you get into God's flow, you become rested in his flow, and risk starts to become something we have an appetite for. And I think business, family, whatever, there's a sense of adventure God wants to put back in his people. Yeah. And as a church, we want to be a part of that. I think linked to this, though, is knowing as a leader what you should be putting energy into, because risk involves like resource allocation, energy, there's a cost to it, and what you shouldn't. You speak about activity and inactivity both having necessary leadership calls. Yeah. Could you speak to that for just a minute?
So for me, success in my life is a very intentional management of my activity and measuring just the right intentional amount of inactivity in varying places. So it's kind of a little bit counterintuitive to think about, because my number one strength is achiever. And so what that means is I love to be active. I love to get stuff done. I love to be engaged. So I'm very forward-leaning. I'm very front-footed. I'm typically the first to show up to go, hey, man, I'll do that. Because it's in the completion that I get so much reward from God.
Sure.
So learning the art or the skill of inactivity is a little bit counterintuitive for me. But over time, what I've realized is, even baking, like something as simple as creating something in the kitchen, is the refined, recipe-driven, correct amount of activity and then inactivity that allows this wonderful masterpiece to show up. And it's the crafty, artful combination of those two things in the right sequence that's most important. So when I think about our faith walk, or when I think about growing a church under God's design, if I put myself in your shoes, and I actually wouldn't mind for you to speak to this as the senior leader for the church, but to just say, even as a leader, I think about what's the right amount of activity for us?
Sure.
And then what's the right amount of inactivity? When is the right time to launch, and when is the right time to wait? And to some degree, your choices there are managing the difference between risk and gambling.
Sure.
Because risk it's very informed. I have a lot of information. I've done my research. I've done my homework. I truly believe that this favorable outcome is possible for us, but there are no guarantees.
Sure.
Because there's faith, right? I got to have to step into it. I don't know the outcome. Faith is required. That's risk. Gambling, though, is, you take $1,000 and you just toss it in the air, and it's one way or it's the other way, and you have no control over everything. You've got no research. It's all hope, and it's just irresponsible.
Yeah.
And I'm vehemently against gambling because it just looks like poor stewardship. But I'm so for informed risk, especially when God's in the space.
So I'll talk to the link space for just a bit for anyone that's listening, and I guess to encourage anyone that's going through the same conversation in their minds, is when we first moved into this building, for some it was perceived as, do we even need it? What's the point? For others, they were like, couldn't we rather be putting churches in other places? We felt God saying, this is the establishment of something. This is a strengthening for our church before we do stretch into other spaces. Yeah. And so the activity that we motivated or felt God leading us into was the activity of this building project, which included financial campaigns, included sacrifice in people's lives, included new ways of thinking to get this off the ground. And we actually pushed pause on so much of the stuff others were kind of going, but you're linked, you should be in Umhlanga, and you should go there, and you should do that. And they were saying, aren't you putting too much resource into one place? Surely you can make a difference elsewhere. And we actually felt to say no to that possibility while we said yes to this one.
Nice.
And it was challenging because everyone's got a different opinion. But we felt like this was the best place to allocate our energy and resource. And so now, fast track 6 years down the line, I feel like God has now allowed the strengthening of this place to become the fuel, the possibility, the people even, that are now leading us into the spaces people thought we should have gone to long ago. And now the activity is saying, okay, now we're putting our energy into Umhlanga and into a new season, a new campus. And we're pushing pause on some of the need for it to all be here as we sow into the possibility there.
Why is now the right season?
Oh, man, that's such a good question. And Pastor Brian Houston of Hillsong, he spoke to me once and he mentioned right person, right place, right time. And I remember thinking...
No way, he told you that?
He told me that.
So okay, little thing. Pastor Robert just asked him the same thing like 2 years ago because he's coming to Dallas, right? Hillsong's just planted in Dallas. And he goes, well, you're here, let me ask you. Because we're good friends with them. And we don't feel like that's competition. We love them. We welcome them. And he said the same thing to Robert. He goes, I got 3 things for you. Right person, right place, right time. And that's all he gave him. And Robert was like, okay.
No, it's genius, right? And so when he said that, I thought, well, we got the right place. We kind of know where we're going to go. But right person and right time, I just don't feel in my spirit. I don't feel God has spoken on that. And it was probably about a year ago now that a friend and a person that's on staff with us came forward and said, hey, man, I want to help lead us into Umhlanga. And it was the first time someone had really put their hand up that has the heartbeat of who we are as a church. And we felt like God said, this is the right, we're starting the process of the right person here. We have the place, at least the location starting to come together. And then let's just wait on timing. And so I think, when those 3 things kind of lined up, we felt like this is a go. This is a green light, And so we feel like we're in the sweet spot of heaven's plan from Schlangenau,
Wow.
and super excited about that.
Well, let me give you some props for the right amount of action and the right amount of inaction in an intentional way. And as a senior leader, what I'm hearing you say is, we waited. We waited on God.
Yeah.
We waited for the right time. And that's important, man. That's important to say.
Yeah.
Good job. Thanks.
Yeah, I think I'm maturing. Yeah.
Well, hopefully we all are.
Oh man, I'm learning. I remember at 25, I didn't care what left in the background, like
Yeah.
distraction.
Right.
But now there's faith with vision.
Yeah.
It's not just reckless. So I want to talk just a little bit about being a senior leader now. Managing organizations. You spoke earlier on, and it got me. You spoke about the last 2%. I mean, a big conversation globally now in teams and leadership and culture is around vulnerability, being honest, building honest relationships with one another. And it really is breaking down some of the mindset of, I just do this, it'll all work out. No, we need chemistry. We need cohesion. There needs to be something bigger than this.
Right.
And relationships big.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned the 2% thing, and I was like, wait, stop. I haven't heard that. Tell our listeners about that.
Yeah, so for us, we like to talk about the difference between transparency and vulnerability, right? So if I give you transparency, I'll tell you, hey, I'm kind of nervous because my daughter's going to marry a guy, and September 1st is the wedding day, and I don't know what that's going to be like, and got some thoughts about that. And that's good transparency. You now know something about me, what I'm concerned about. I'm letting you into my world, but it hasn't crossed the line for vulnerability yet. It becomes vulnerable when I tell you something you could use to hurt me with.
Sure.
So I think that the trap is that we operate on a transparency level and hope that gets us enough of the distance we need to go. But when you're doing hairy, audacious things, like planning another church in an environment where there are already some, in fact, there's so many, some of them are dying, and some people might look and go, have you lost your mind? Like, what are you doing? Like, there are other places, right? You got to go back to a place where you've heard from God and you're secure in that. But if I'm going to support you in a way, and you're gonna help me do that with you, then there's got to be some vulnerability there. Not just because I need to hand you stuff you can beat me with, but because I need to know how to support you when you're not here in a way that's truly meaningful to you. And transparency won't get me there.
Yeah, that's good.
I'm going to have to be vulnerable. And so one of the languages that we'll use sometimes, and I know others use too, is to say, okay, this is fantastic communication. I'm really getting what you're saying. But is there maybe 2% back there that you have just not brought out yet?
That's brilliant.
And could you or would you have the courage to tell me the last 2%? Because invariably, it's not you telling me something that's maybe scary for you. It's you telling me something in a way that I might not have served you well.
Sure.
And it's just a small thing. It's 2%. It's not a big change.
But powerful.
But incredibly powerful, yeah, because it's at the edge of vulnerability, right? So the wounding capacity of this tiny amount, 2 out of 100, is actually pretty large. And it takes quite a bit of courage to get all the way to that last amount.
Sure. Well, I desire that for me. And I remember once a friend sitting down with me, a good friend who I'd see as a voice into my life. And he asked me this question. He said, what's on your heart? And so I started telling him the 98%.
Sure.
He's a friend.
It's safe,
I was going to tell him what was going on. Transparency. I wouldn't have called it back then, but I gave him all this stuff, and he looks at me again and he goes, and what else?
Oh.
And I was like, oh, man, I've given you everything I was willing to give.
Right.
Now I got to dig for what I'm not. And when you said 2%, I realized that's what it is. Yeah. It's like we share up to a point where we're happy we've given everything away we want.
Right.
But it's that little extra that makes all the difference.
Yeah.
And man, I believe in a church and a world and organizations, families, even husbands, wives, where 2% is where we live.
Yeah, 2% it's a leadership idea.
Okay.
It's not just a relationship idea. It certainly deepens my relationship with the people I'm interacting with, and that's important. But it's a leadership idea because if I'm trying to support you, and I'm not in the work that I'm doing, I'm not giving you what you know is fully aligned with the vision that God's given you. And because there's timing in the way that you release the vision that God's given you, you can't, by God's constraint, tell me everything you know. Because He has told you, it's not time yet, wait.
Sure.
And so I might think I want to know that, but under God's constraint, you're not releasing that yet. And so my behavior then is I'm just giving you what I think is the best I know how to give. You know where we're going. You know how my behavior is going to need to shift just a little bit in order to be aligned with where we're going, even though you can't say anything about it yet. And so if I said to you, is that all? And you go, no, I have another 2% to tell you. And you make a small adjustment in my heart. I'm probably going to leave going, I don't get it. And that's going to be actually true, and it has to just be okay.
Okay, got you.
It has to just be okay because I don't see what you see yet. And I'm not paid to. That's not my job. You are the leader, so God's going to give it to you first. That's God's divine order. I'm totally for that. So maybe then, two pieces I want to talk to. How you can make this easier for me and how I can make this easier for you.
Sure.
Because I think the 2% is necessary. Because otherwise, if I don't give it to you, that creates a little bit of gap. There's a little bit of space between your shoulder and mine. And that's where the enemy gets in. And that's why it's a leadership issue. Because we need to stand shoulder to shoulder with no sunlight that comes between the two of us.
That's good.
And so the way you make it easier for me is it's not in what you say, it's certainly in how you say it. So the way you say it is going to be loving, patient, and you're going to take some time so that I can understand as much as I can understand in that moment what God will allow you to say to me, right? Don't soften on what you need to say. That's got to be the last 2%. But how you deliver it makes a big difference in the way I can adopt that. What makes it easier for me, or rather what makes it easier for you then to say that to me is how I behave.
In response to?
In response to that, yeah. If I throw my toys out of the cot, go storming out of the deal, right? Like that makes it unsafe for you to ever have a 2% conversation with me. I need to be able to hear what you're saying, maybe be shocked even by what you're saying, but recognize how you're saying it is an indication of your heart toward me.
That's awesome.
And to go, okay, I may not have all the picture, and I've been in this space before, but I trust who you are and where we're going, and I so believe in the vision. I can take this because it's better for me and it's better for everybody else.
So the last 2%, for sure, having spoken about this, is going to be something that sticks with me in this leadership season. So that is amazing. For the sake of time, I want to kind of close with an idea that you mentioned to our open house group on Tuesday, the hurricane theory. And the first time you mentioned to me, I was sitting in a Starbucks, Mall of Africa. I told you the story, cheap earphones in my ears. I'm like, I don't know what you just said, but I need to get more. Yeah. And so we've been talking about hurricane theory, and you've been studying it. But in essence, it's that we focus on the core. Even though there's this crowd, you just keep honing in on the core. Like, who are we? What are we about? Where's this going? Who's the core that are going to carry it for us? Rather than trying to manage the periphery always. And whether you're in organizations, thinking about customers forever, or just the periphery of your staff team or whatever, you got to keep reminding yourself core is important.
Right.
I love this. Could you give us a bit of a thought around hurricane theory? Why in a linked church moment now, as we move to Mshlanga, investing in the core and actually people taking ownership of this is so powerful?
Yeah, what I learned, I think a couple of takeaways from hurricane theory that were really moving for me is that the size of the storm is directly connected to the intensity of the eye. And in church world, the amount of influence that God gives you is going to be directly connected to how effectively and how powerfully you have led and managed the core of who is around with you. And the core will be somewhere between 5 and 10% of who's coming on a Sunday. So if you're running 1,000, your core is going to be, 75 to 100, maybe 120 people. It's in that range somewhere. And this core group of people are the folks who, they get it first. They get it strongest. They understand deeper. They're even more committed than the average bear. And it's through them that the infusion of ministry is permeating into the broader congregation. This is actually God's design, because Ephesians 4 talks about how it's the body who's supposed to do the work of the ministry.
Sure.
As empowerers, you and I and the staff here at Link are to be able to equip and set parameters for that group of people to be able to deploy the healing and the prayer and the intercession and the teaching, all of that makes its way throughout the congregation. And I just think that we in our desire to serve the people, as the crowd gets larger, which it should, because healthy things grow, right? we end up taking our eye off of the group of people who are doing the work, and we attend rather to the crowd. And because the crowd is bigger and the crowd is noisier and the crowd is louder, we tend to pour all of our attention into that. And it seduces you. Like it gets your eye off the game. And then things get weird.
Yeah. This has been helpful for us as a team because our church has grown substantially in the last few years. And I do find myself wanting to make sure that everyone's okay, which is humanly impossible, right?
Yeah.
And so this has helped me understand, like, if I just kind of keep focus and alignment in a core group of people that have the heart and belief of what we're about, they will then bleed into that core group of people around them and them and them and so on. I mean, you mentioned even Jesus, he would withdraw with some of his key guys.
Right.
As the crowd would grow, he would withdraw. It's almost like back to front.
Right.
The crowd's growing. We need you. And he's like, no, this is the perfect time for us to go and remind ourselves what this is about, who we are, and how we're going to go back and serve them well. And I've just loved that. It's been such a blessing to our church.
Yeah, and I think I want to illustrate a point you made, which is that what's in your heart is to serve the entire crowd out to the very fuzzy edge of the whole of the
even those still thinking about coming in and seeing what it's about.
And so what I want to illustrate is the idea is not to not attend to the crowd, but it's the way in which you attend to the crowd that matters. If, as a church, you get there through the body doing the work of the ministry, then that design is correct, and your first line of attention is to the core, then I think that design works and the storm continues to grow. But if you bypass the core and go straight to the crowd, you step around a group of people who God has provided to do the work of the ministry and who actually are gifted. Spiritual gifts, all kinds of other things, to be able to do that work. When you step around them, you effectively say, your contribution is not needed here. And I don't hear you guys saying that. I don't think that's what you're saying.
Well, we wouldn't want to say that.
Yeah.
So, Allan, I want to say thank you. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for your team coming out. And we're just grateful for the relationship we have. I feel like what you've done is, in some ways, you've been the one that would pull me aside and say, let's strengthen you so that you could be a blessing to this church. And so if anyone's listening to this, I want to tell them that you all need people like Allan Kelsey in your life. Strategic legends that help you and remind you what this is all about. Thanks for coming out.
Oh, my pleasure.
And bless you guys.
Anytime, babe.
Dizzy, did we lose a camera? But it's okay. We'll back it up with this. Yeah, that's great, bro. There's so much good stuff in there. I always think, like, how do we